Welcome back to Contract Intelligence through Category Management and Strategic Sourcing, sponsored by Ernst & Young. I'm Francis Rose and joined by Angela Billups of the Department of Health and Human Services, Ken Brennan of the Department of Defense, Kevin Youel Page of GSA, and Paul Donato of Ernst & Young. And the success stories that we see, folks, across government are starting to crop up. Kevin, we talked a little bit in the first segment about the policies and procedures that get us to where we are. We talked a little bit about price and concerns from folks that category management is just another price driver. Are there enough now success stories and examples that we can point to where we can now say, look, this isn't only about price. Certainly price, as you said in the first segment, is a consideration, but price isn't it.
Yeah, I think, I don't think we've, even going back to the strategic sourcing days, I don't think it was always all about price. I mean, I think Ken made the point brilliantly. I mean, we've always considered the small business component of this. We've always considered the compliance and trying to make the right size the requirement so that it's we're getting the level of service we need, not more, not less. A great example I always go to is when we first went out to understand how to buy overnight delivery. It's a deceptively simple or complex subcategory of spending. It's things we know as FedEx, UPS, and that sort of thing. When we first set out to do this as a government, we had no data at all about where we shipped to and from. We had agencies that came collectively together to get smarter about it, and we really didn't have any information about what prices we were paying, what our shipping profiles looked like, what our real cost drivers were. And it was through the good practice that was drawn out of one GS-13 in Texas that we were able to define the good practice that existed in government somewhere, in the Internal Revenue Service, as it turned out, that was able to be quickly deployed at the time to 5 agencies, now over 150 agencies, saving hundreds of millions of dollars a year. It's not savings driven on price alone. That has been helpful. It has been driven by demand management practices. We now know where people are shipping overnight on a Friday afternoon to get a package to a government office on Saturday that is more likely than not closed. We're not doing that as much. We're saving a lot of money there. We're saving money helping people know to ship ground when it's to a location closer than 150 miles from the shipping point. So we are using the information gathered from sourcing events not only to take a look at price, but to look at how we can use data to manage our own demand better, to manage our own behavior, our own consumption of the product and service. So it's one example. There are many like this that exist throughout the federal government where we've become better consumers on behalf of the taxpayer because of pooling our knowledge and our ability to work together.
Kevin, I hope that GS-13 got an award of some sort, some kind of even a certificate.
You bet she did.
That's excellent. Angela, that data seems to be a very valuable component, in my view, of how you execute the strategy and how you determine what works and what doesn't. Has that been your experience at HHS?
Yes, it's most definitely been our experience, simply because one of the things, and like I said, this case is just recent that we started looking at laboratory support. And one of the things that we've been able to do with that is just to understand what has been our historical spend in that area, and not just looking at spend alone, but I did need to know about what has been that space. How did we spend those dollars? And what we found is we spent those dollars on thousands of contracts. And some of the things that we looked at with this business case is, where is the spend? Who was doing the spend, as in how much money was it the resource costing us? We were also looking at the way, just like Kevin was saying, looking at the inventory. You know, do we individually do inventory? Is that something that we can put into a new contract for this category and build the inventory piece into the contract? So it has given us opportunities to look at a varied number of areas that we would not have looked at before, simply because we have started to manage by category.
So, Ken, if you have a broad swath of data to be able to make decisions from, then price becomes one piece of that data set, I imagine, and not the main piece of that data set. Is that fair to say?
It is. And I think that there are varying levels of importance amongst the portfolios. In things that are strictly commoditized with a plethora of competitive, viable suppliers, price is probably going to be more important. If it is something that is more of a niche category, small business, competition amongst the groups may be more important, but it all factors in. And once you start looking at it, people begin to have that aha moment about understanding how this begins to fit together. And I think the category managers are the folks that really begin that dialogue, and that data helps people understand the landscape.
Paul, one of the successful elements, I imagine, is making sure, as Kevin talked about in the first part of our conversation, that the right people and right organizations are running the categories. How have you seen that break out over the past several months, that being so critical to making sure this works effectively?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things we see folks doing is taking a hard look at the organization itself and really determining where's the existing knowledge as it relates to a commodity or other pieces of the process, and potentially making shifts in the organization to really bifurcate in a way that you get those people with the right expertise in those areas. And so I think there's been a focus on that, and then understanding where do we maybe not have the skills that we need, and then how do we go do that? Is it an upskilling exercise? Do we have to go higher? I think you see a lot of that going on, especially up at GSA, in terms of looking for some of that expertise coming out of the private sector practice. And I think you'll continue to see that as we further expand the concept of commodity management.
This really is a breakdown of silos, and another issue, Kevin, that the government has some issues with sometimes. It strikes me that they've fallen a little faster in this area than they have in other cross-agency initiatives over the past 10 or 15 years that I've been watching these things. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think it's because the acquisition arena across government has often been one of the bright lights in interagency cooperation and true government-wide views. I mean, we're not perfect by any stretch, but we do have common regulations, and that has really, over the years, bound us together as a community that has maybe been different from some other parts of the federal operation. So it's a very tight-knit community, and it is a community that knows each other by name, and so I think that has been very helpful in creating the trust and the basic baseline for the understanding of the problem that's allowed us to address it this way.
I noted that one of your fellow panelists, and I won't identify him or her, as we were chatting before this started, said, yeah, we've done this before. So you have all not only know each other, but you're all out talking about these issues in public. What's the most common misconception? I think I'll start with you, Ken. What's the most common misconception when you go to speak, either among industry or maybe even among your own team, about what you're doing now and how this will work in the future?
The most common perception, while there are a couple of acronym names that go with it, is defined in the perception that this is a race to the bottom, is that it is all about driving the prices as humanly possible, as low as possible, without regard to mission, competition, innovation, any of the other things that we do indeed care about. And that we are not taking the focus beyond the cost, and that just certainly isn't the case. Without mission performance, there is no need to have an acquisition, and if we get too far down to the bottom, we get to that race to the bottom, you drive folks out of the marketplace or destroy the market capability, and we certainly don't want that.
Mm-hmm. Angela, misconceptions that you've run across?
Most of the misconception is just the idea that when you look at things from even at a department, enterprise-wide level, that you've kind of forced out that thought process at the individual agencies. And what I'm trying to get people to understand is this really is about the department, it's about the agency, because one of the things about the acquisition life cycle, it is a vital part of what makes the the federal government run. Acquisition is a necessary evil. Mm-hmm. And some people do think it's evil, and it is necessary. And so what I try to do is help people to understand that, and there are times when we're going to have to make some decisions. For instance, when I look at category management, and a lot of people think that we're pushing out small businesses. In the areas that I'm looking at strategically, I may end up awarding to small businesses and paying them a little bit more to do the same thing, but there will still, at the end of the day, be some savings. So everything is thought about, and mm-hmm. that is what makes the category management concept work very well, because you're looking broadly across and not just narrowly focused.
Mm-hmm. Kevin, you've heard all the misconceptions. You agreed with some of the ones that you've heard so far. Others that you've heard that you'd like to puncture?
No, I mean, yes, I would. I think Ken was right on that this is not a race to the bottom, but I think I do need to acknowledge that this is a dramatic change, and it's a change not only for industry that is trying to understand how am I going to be impacted if the government gets more organized. It will, in fact, change the competitive landscape. It will, in fact, create different drivers for success. And so I think there's a lot of anxiety around what do I need to do to be successful in an environment in the future where a government might behave differently. And I understand that. I just think that it's important that change be understood in the context of trying to be better, faster, and more innovative, not necessarily pushing to the lowest price. We're really not after the lowest price. The same kind of change is hard for someone inside the government. We have a lot of people who see their job right now as maybe performing some of these services for their agency or their department, but how many different people do we need awarding lawn care contracts in the federal government? I mean, at the end of the day, I would much rather apply the talent and excitement of an employee who's currently doing something that 500 other employees elsewhere are doing, and have them really focused on the mission in the agency they live in. If they're at USAID, I want them doing development, and if they're at Health and Human Services, creating health. And I just don't think we're optimizing the talent we have inside today. But people do worry about what's in it for me, and they worry about this change impacting their career as well.
Paul, how has what you've heard from your fellow panelists fit with what you're hearing as you go enterprise-wide across government?
Yeah, I would echo everything they said. I think, interestingly, the area that we probably hear the biggest misconception is that category management is all about strategic sourcing. And really, as we work with our clients, one of the things we talk about, Kevin mentioned demand management, huge component of category management and a way to streamline that acquisition process. Another big piece, total cost of ownership, right? And I think when people hear total cost of ownership, they think about big DoD weapon systems, for example, which is absolutely true, right? How can we think about the life cycle cost of an item or a weapon system to maybe make a different decision at the point of acquisition? But it applies very much to those, I think, everyday things like printers, for example, right? You think about the acquisition cost of a printer, there's so many other things that go into it from a maintenance perspective, from a toner cost, and really using category management to try and take advantage of those types of things to really think about what's the total cost of this thing going to be over the life cycle. So I do think there's sometimes a big emphasis on that sort of initial savings from a contract, but looking at those things like demand management, total cost of ownership, supplier risk are really critical, and I think can really drive some of those efficiencies we're talking about.
So Kevin, it sounds to me then like that's the sweet spot for you explaining to industry that this isn't all just about price. Because you look at a life cycle management of a printer or a weapon system or whatever it is, we've seen any number of examples in the past 4 or 5 years during the budget situation that we're in, where an agency maybe did do something at the cheapest possible price, and it didn't turn out to pay off in the long run, but they did what they felt they had to do to fit the needs of one particular fiscal year.
Yeah, I mean, people do shop on price and at times, and sometimes it's a good strategy, and sometimes it's a terrible mistake. And that really is something we need to leave up to the discretion of the acquisition officials involved in that transaction. And I think a category owner can understand how much of that's going on within their category and help nudge behavior in the right direction. So I think industry has fixated, because there are a lot of things that GSA is doing right now to create more data around the category, one data element of which is price. They're very fixated on, are they going to come after price and price alone? But I think, and I've tried to say this over and over, we are collecting information about the category, including price. And so a big part of what we hope to get out of some of the transactional data information that we're requesting is simply who's buying what. Forget what price for a minute, just who's buying what. That will take us very far downfield in terms of improving our demand management and our understanding of what is in the category. Yes, I'd like to know the price too. That's a very important component of best value. But that is not the primary mission right now for a lot of what we're trying to do.
So your statement, who's buying what, gets a lot of agreement from the rest of the panel. What do you do with that information, and how do you make sure that it's a comprehensive collection of information and not just a straight up inventory, here's where we're doing this? Or maybe it's as simple as that, Angela?
Well, I think the answer to that question also lies in the perspective. And what I mean by that is, one of the things that I say often these days is, sometimes I think, depending on where you sit in the federal government from the standpoint of your everyday job, if your job is a scientist and you're focused on the mission of getting that study done and so on and so forth, but if your job is like the business advisor in the acquisition life cycle, sometimes people don't think those things go together. And so what I tell people is, acquisition is not exclusive of the mission but the mission is also not exclusive of acquisition, but I put it in very general terms. The mission doesn't move without some type of business environment, and so that's what we're doing. We're providing the business environment that makes the mission become whatever that expected outcome is, and category management is just a way of pulling all of that together to get all of us to the table at the same time, so we are focusing on everything and trying to figure out what is the goodness in every area, what should be top priority, what should fall to the bottom of the list, but doing that in a very collaborative way.
So, Ken, would it be reasonable and appropriate for me to say then that one of the important ingredients to success in category management is a tighter collaboration and a tighter connection between acquisition folks and end users to really understand what's going on and how the going on to get what the mission executors need it continues and strengthens? Oh,
definitely. And I would almost suggest that the term end customers can be expanded to the ripple effect downstream, that it's not just the beneficiary, the immediate beneficiary of that particular contract, but how that product interfaces with the next person that takes that up as an input and uses it. Because what we're seeing is the silos that you alluded to in the federal government exist in even individual departments or agencies or organizational codes that they don't understand how different capabilities impact others, and going to the life cycle costs to understand that, you really definitely need to get those folks together as a group and as a team.
Final thought, Paul, as we go through all of these ingredients, and we've talked about data, we've talked about price, we've talked about some other elements, anything missing that we haven't covered that's an important component of executing category management successfully?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing is how do you lay in a foundation that'll help you sustain this over time, right? And so I think, sometimes we're quick to try and chase a quick win, and people get excited about it. But if we haven't put the foundational elements in place, whether it's an organizational structure, if it's the policies, it's the procedures, those things can't be sustained over time. So I think that's a really critical piece is, are we putting the foundation in place that can help these things sustain over time?
Our conversation is called Contract Intelligence Through Category Management and Strategic Sourcing. You're listening to Federal News Radio, and we'll be back to continue in just a moment.